I had a Tesla come into my shop last winter. Owner was confused because his range had dropped about 40 miles from what it was the previous spring. Car was only 2 years old. No accidents, no major issues. Just a guy who'd spent an entire winter using his car the same way he always did, not realizing that cold weather doesn't play by the same rules. What got me was that he wasn't doing anything extreme. Normal driving, occasional supercharger, plugging in most nights. But a few specific habits, things most owners never think twice about, had been quietly working against that battery pack for months. That's what this video is about. Not scare tactics, just the real patterns I've seen repeatedly with cold weather Tesla battery wear, and what you can actually do differently. Let's get into it. What cold weather actually does inside your battery. Before the mistakes, a quick picture of what's happening inside the pack when temperatures drop, because it makes everything else make sense. Your Tesla's battery works by moving lithium ions through a liquid electrolyte between two electrodes. In warm conditions, those ions flow freely, and the battery delivers power efficiently. Once temperatures approach freezing, that electrolyte thickens. Think cold honey versus warm honey, and ion movement slows down noticeably. That's the direct cause of the range drop and that muted acceleration feel you get on cold mornings. The battery hasn't lost capacity permanently at that point. It's just fighting the temperature. What most owners don't know about is a secondary process called lithium plating. Researchers at Northeastern University have documented what happens when a cold battery gets pushed too hard. Lithium ions, moving too slowly through the thickened electrolyte, get stuck mid-transfer and convert into metallic lithium inside the cell. That metallic buildup doesn't dissolve back into the chemistry. It permanently reduces how many active ions are available to generate electricity, which shows up as capacity loss that doesn't recover when temperatures improve. Tesla's thermal management system, a liquid heating and cooling loop wrapped around the pack, is specifically engineered to prevent those conditions from developing. It does a genuinely good job. But in my experience, where it struggles is when owners do specific things that work directly against it. Here's what those things look like in practice. Mistake 1. Fast charging without preconditioning the battery first. I've talked to customers about this more times than I can count, and they're almost always surprised when I explain what actually happened during that slow supercharger session. Usually what happens is this: the car has been sitting outside unplugged overnight, temperatures are in the teens or low 20s, and the owner pulls into a supercharger expecting a normal fast charge. Instead, the charging rate barely moves. The estimated completion time looks completely off. What most people don't realize is that for the first 10 to 15 minutes at the charger, a significant chunk of that incoming electricity isn't charging the battery at all. The car is using it to heat the pack up to a temperature where fast charging is actually safe to perform. There's a test that shows exactly how much this gap costs. A Tesla Model 3 left outside unplugged overnight at around -33 degrees Fahrenheit with no preconditioning before heading to the charger, pulled a maximum of 100 kilowatts at the supercharger on a car rated for over 200 kilowatts under normal conditions. That same 25% to 75% charge took close to 55 minutes. With a properly preconditioned battery, the same route on the same charger ran at 238 kilowatts and finished in 33 minutes. Same car, same station. Battery temperature was the only meaningful variable. What concerns me from a long-term perspective is what repeated cold, fast charge sessions do at the cell level. Pushing high current through a battery where the electrolyte is still thick and ion movement is sluggish is one of the conditions where lithium plating tends to build up. The management system limits the charge rate to compensate, but every throttled session is still the battery absorbing stress that a properly warmed pack wouldn't experience. One cold charge session here and there probably isn't moving the needle. Doing it every morning through a full winter is where I've seen it show up in capacity numbers by spring. The fix is straightforward. Open the Tesla app, go to Climate, start preconditioning 30 to 45 minutes before you need to charge. When the car is still plugged in at home during that warm-up, it draws from the wall instead of the battery, so you're not burning pack energy to heat the pack. If you're navigating to a supercharger through the in-car trip planner, the car automatically begins heating the battery on the way there. That's a feature a lot of owners have never intentionally used, and it's exactly what it was built for. Mistake 2. Leaving your Tesla unplugged overnight in freezing weather. Customers often assume unplugged is fine because their old gas car handled cold nights without being connected to anything. Reasonable assumption, but electric vehicles work differently in a way that matters here. When a Tesla sits unplugged in freezing temperatures, the battery management system stays active. It's monitoring cell temperatures, running background software, and when it detects that the pack is getting too cold, it activates the battery heater. That heater draws energy, and with no charger connected, that energy comes directly from the battery. In moderate cold, that overnight drain might be 4 or 5%. As temperatures drop further into single digits and below, that number can climb considerably. I've had customers come in confused about significantly lower range on cold mornings after leaving the car unplugged. Once I ask about overnight temperatures and whether they were connected to anything, that's usually where the answer lives. What the car is doing overnight in those conditions isn't negligible. It's actively working to stay within safe operating temperatures, and it's pulling the energy to do that from the pack it's trying to protect. Keeping the car connected to even a basic 120-volt outlet changes that equation entirely. The car draws from the grid to run its thermal system instead of draining itself. Tesla's own documentation is explicit on this point. Plug in when not in use in cold weather. The car doesn't need to be actively charging. Even a trickle connection means the battery isn't the power source for overnight heating. There's also a less commonly discussed scenario for anyone who lives in genuinely extreme climates. Below around -30 degrees Celsius, if a battery reaches both a deep state of discharge and extreme cold simultaneously, the management system loses some of its ability to protect individual cells uniformly. Most drivers in moderate cold climates won't hit that threshold regularly. But for anyone in the northern half of the country during a real cold snap, staying plugged in is the simplest way to make sure that scenario never develops. Mistake 3. Flooring it before the battery has warmed up. Customers usually think this one's harmless because the car responds. It accelerates, maybe a little softer than usual, but it moves, so they figure the car's fine with it. Here's what I've seen happen at the cell level over time. When the battery is still cold, its internal resistance is elevated. High resistance means there's more opposition to current flow within the cells themselves. A hard acceleration demand pushes high current through cells that are already fighting elevated resistance that generates internal heat unevenly. And in cold-soaked cells, uneven thermal stress is one of the factors that contributes to localized wear over repeated cycles. It's not catastrophic from a single instance, but it's a pattern I've noticed in batteries that show earlier than expected degradation. The car does try to tell you this is happening. That blue snowflake icon on the touchscreen is the battery management system flagging that a portion of the stored energy is thermally unavailable. The pack isn't ready for full output yet. In my experience, a lot of drivers dismiss it as a minor cold weather quirk rather than an actual system message. But the car is genuinely limiting power for a reason, and working against that limit repeatedly adds up. Regenerative braking is limited for the same reason, and that one can catch people off guard in a more immediate way. On a cold morning, the familiar one-pedal driving response may be reduced or absent entirely because the battery can't safely absorb regenerated energy back into cold cells. If you're used to relying on regen coming down a hill and it's not there, you need significantly more distance to stop using mechanical brakes. That's a safety consideration worth knowing before you're in a situation where it matters. Most of the time, 15 to 20 minutes of relaxed driving is enough for the pack to normalize. Once that snowflake clears, the system has done its job, and full power and regen are back online. Until it clears, easy acceleration and extra following distance is the right approach, both for the battery and for the drive itself. Mistake 4. Letting the battery run low before cold weather hits. This one is about timing more than behavior, and it's a situation I see more often in early winter when people haven't adjusted their habits yet from the warmer months. Usually what happens is this. Someone finishes their day at 18 or 20%, figures they'll charge in the morning. Temperatures drop overnight into the single digits, and by morning they've got a cold, low battery that now needs to heat itself, drive to a supercharger, and accept a fast charge on a cold pack. 3 separate stresses stacked back to back. Any one of them on its own is manageable. All 3 together, first thing on a cold morning, is when I see people having the worst cold weather charging experiences. When a lithium-ion battery is at a low state of charge, the cells are closer to their physical depletion limits. The electrolyte chemistry is under more strain. Add extreme cold on top of that, where ion movement is already sluggish, and the battery management system has less margin to work with in terms of how it distributes load across cells and regulates charging behavior. The protective responses the system normally applies become harder to execute cleanly. What I tell customers in winter, try to keep it above 50% before overnight parking when you know temperatures are going to be rough. That buffer gives the thermal system something to work with. If the car needs to run the heater through the night, it has charge headroom to do it without the cells already sitting near empty. And for long winter drives, plan your supercharger stops earlier than you normally would. Arriving at 25% in summer is routine. Arriving at 25% in winter after an unplugged night in the cold is a different situation entirely. Mistake 5. Using the supercharger as your daily charger through winter. I want to be careful with this one because it gets oversimplified a lot and the nuance actually matters. Recurrent conducted a study across more than 12,500 Tesla vehicles and found no statistically significant difference in battery degradation between cars that supercharged more than 90% of the time versus those that rarely used fast chargers at all. So frequent supercharging under normal conditions, with a properly preconditioned pack, doesn't appear to cause the accelerated degradation people often assume. That's worth knowing, because a lot of Tesla owners are unnecessarily anxious about using superchargers. Where the picture changes is when you're combining frequent fast charging with cold weather and consistently skipping preconditioning, cold pack, lower state of charge, high DC current demand. That specific combination is where lithium plating risk runs highest. The battery management system throttles the charge rate in response, but the throttling itself is the system communicating that the pack is under more stress than it would be at operating temperature. That throttled, higher resistance charge session is doing more work per kilowatt hour than a warm battery session at the same charger. The gap in real-world terms? That cold Model Y test showed the unpreconditioned battery topping out at 135 kilowatts instead of 238. That's not just a time cost. The pack is processing current through a higher resistance circuit and absorbing the difference. Repeat that pattern every day as your only charging method through a full winter. And, in my experience, that's the kind of usage pattern that tends to show up in capacity numbers by the following year. If your daily charging option is genuinely only a supercharger, use Trip Planner every single time, so the car warms the battery en route. That one step converts a cold pack fast charge into a warm pack fast charge, which is a meaningfully different experience for the cells. And if level 2 charging is accessible at your workplace, a parking garage, or anywhere near your routine, use that for daily charging and save the supercharger for longer trips. Lower power, less heat per session, gentler on cells across thousands of cycles. Mistake 6. Running only short trips all winter without adjusting how you do it. Customers sometimes tell me they deliberately keep their winter driving conservative. Short errands, close to home, nothing demanding. Sounds sensible. In practice, though, short cold start trips are often harder on a battery than people realize. Here's what I've seen happen on a typical cold short trip. The battery has been sitting outside in freezing air, so it starts below operating temperature with elevated internal resistance and limited regenerative braking capability. The moment you pull away, the car draws a significant burst of power for windshield defrost and initial cabin heating from a battery that's already operating inefficiently. If you're going 5 minutes to the grocery store, that startup energy cost gets spread across barely any miles at all. The cost per mile on that trip is genuinely terrible from an energy standpoint. The longer-term concern is the cycling pattern that creates when it happens repeatedly. Multiple short cold start trips throughout a day mean the battery cycles through cold, stressed conditions repeatedly without ever reaching and sustaining its proper operating temperature. The pack cools back down between trips and cold starts again each time. Cold temperatures combined with higher than normal current draw is specifically the condition that battery researchers flag as increasing lithium plating risk. Short winter trips create that combination more consistently than almost any other usage pattern I see. The practical adjustment is combining errands into single longer outings so the battery warms up once and stays warm across multiple stops. On days when a short trip is unavoidable, preconditioning 20 minutes beforehand makes a genuine difference. The pack comes up to temperature before you start demanding current from it, which means regen kicks in sooner and that cold start energy surge is much smaller. It sounds counterintuitive to spend 20 minutes preparing for a 10-minute drive, but it's exactly the kind of adjustment that shows up in battery health over a full winter season. Mistake 7. Charging to 100% and leaving it parked outside in the cold. Most Tesla owners have heard that charging to 100% daily isn't ideal. The general recommendation for non-LFP batteries is to stay around 80% for routine use. Cold weather adds a specific layer to that which doesn't get talked about enough. When a battery sits at 100% state of charge, the cells are operating at higher internal voltage. That elevated voltage state makes the chemistry more reactive. Under normal conditions, that's manageable because the car typically doesn't sit at 100% for very long before the owner drives it. Park a fully charged battery outside in sub-freezing temperatures overnight though. And now those high-voltage cells are simultaneously dealing with thermal stress from the cold. The two conditions together, high voltage and cold, create more of what researchers call calendar aging, the gradual chemical degradation that accumulates with time regardless of how many miles you're putting on the car. There's also a less obvious energy cost in this scenario. Maintaining a 100% charged pack at stable operating temperature in cold weather draws more ongoing energy than maintaining an 80% pack in the same conditions, because the cells at full charge generate slightly more heat as a byproduct of their higher chemical reactivity, which means the thermal management system has to work harder to keep temperatures balanced across the pack. Per night, it's not a dramatic difference, but across a full winter of cold overnight parking at 100%, that's measurable additional thermal management work being done on cells that are already in a more stressed state. The simple adjustment: set your daily charge limit to 80% and use the scheduled departure feature in the app. Tell the car what time you're leaving and it manages the final top-off and preconditioning automatically. So the battery is at the right temperature and the right charge level right when you need it, without sitting fully charged in the cold for hours beforehand. The practical winter habit checklist. Here's how I summarize this for customers who want straightforward action items. Precondition before every charge stop, 30 to 45 minutes through the app before plugging in at home, or use Trip Planner every time you're heading to a supercharger. In severe cold, allow closer to an hour. This single habit addresses most cold weather charging stress before it starts. Stay plugged in when parked in cold weather. Even a basic 120-volt outlet shifts the overnight thermal management load off the battery and onto the grid. The car stays warm without draining itself. Give the battery 15 to 20 minutes of easy driving before demanding full performance. Watch the blue snowflake icon. When it clears, the system has brought the pack up to operating temperature. Until then, easy on the accelerator and extra following distance for braking. Keep charge above 50% going into cold nights, gives the battery management system room to work, and prevents the dangerous combination of low charge plus extreme cold. Use level 2, charging as your daily default, and save supercharging for longer trips. When you do use a supercharger in winter, always navigate through Trip Planner so the pack arrives warm. Batch short trips into longer outings where possible. One errand run with multiple stops beats 3 separate cold start trips for both range and battery health. Precondition before any unavoidable short trip. Set your daily charge limit to 80% and use scheduled departure. Lets the car handle the final top-off and preconditioning on its own schedule, so the pack isn't sitting at 100% in the cold for hours before you leave. Here's the honest bottom line. Cold weather on its own isn't what degrades Tesla batteries. The range drop you see in winter is mostly temporary. Once temperatures recover and the pack warms up, most of it comes back. What I've seen not come back is the gradual capacity loss that accumulates when specific habits put repeated stress on cold cells across months of winter driving. It's usually not one dramatic event. It's a full season of skipped preconditioning, unplugged overnight parking, cold supercharger sessions, and repeated short cold start trips. Individually, probably not moving the needle much. Consistently across a whole winter, that's when the spring range check tells a story the owner wasn't expecting. And that's what showed up in the car that came into my shop. None of what I've described today is complicated or expensive. It's just habits that most owners haven't been shown. If this helped, drop a like, share it with someone heading into their first Tesla winter, and subscribe for more real ownership content. See you in the next one.